Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good morning. This is the Open Door with Jim Hannick as your host, and Margaret Posner as our guest. Margaret, I was just speaking with Sebastian Mahfood about your efforts at Holy Apostles.
Oh, that's nice.
And he says that you are in California.
Yes, I am.
Where?
Oh, where? In Southern California.
Oh, that's the only place to be if you're going to be in California.
Of course.
You are speaking along with Ed Rushman, who is from Orange County, and I have not properly introduced the program because our producer, Sebastian Mahfood, was regaling us with various and sundry, including how everything tech-wise was working well today. So let me begin as we ought to begin. Jim Hannick here, welcoming you to the Open Door, a door open to the Holy Spirit, a door open to the direction of the Spirit, a door open to our listeners, and a door opening to the tasks that the good Lord has set for us. I'd like to begin with a prayer, a very short prayer. Direct, we beseech thee, O Lord, all our actions by thy holy inspirations, and carry them on by thy gracious assistance, that every work of ours may begin always from thee, and by thee be happily ended, through Christ our Lord. Amen. One of our regulars, Dr. Rhonda Shervin, is not going to be with us for the next month. She is organizing and coordinating a new perpetual adoration program at her parish, and I think she is more than excused from what we do here. But we have much to do here. We missed the last 2 weeks because of Christmas and New Year's, but we are back, more than back. We have worked through the platform of the American Solidarity Party in the last few months, and in the last month or so, we've also explored what's involved in bringing our platform into on-the-ground politics. And Mr. Ed Rushman, who is very much with us today, from Orange County, is going to be crucial in helping us with that part of our program today, because he's dealing with everything that new political initiatives that are serious have to deal with. But the first part of our program today, and how could this not connect with the American Solidarity Party, is taking some time to look at just what solidarity is in the mind of the Church. And I'd like to begin with, and both Margaret and Ed have this at hand. Our listeners, of course, don't, but Sebastian Mahfood kindly posts the agenda for each program on our radio site ahead of time. I'd like to begin with just a paragraph from Pope Francis. In the present condition of global society, where injustices abound and growing numbers of people are deprived of basic human rights and considered expendable, the principle of the common good immediately becomes, logically and inevitably, a summons to solidarity and a preferential option for the poorest of our brothers and sisters. This option entails recognizing the implications of the universal destination of the world's goods. But as I mentioned in the Apostolic Exhortation Evangelii Gaudium, it demands before all else an appreciation of the immense dignity of the poor in the light of our deepest convictions as believers. We need only look around us to see that today this option is in fact an ethical imperative essential for effectively attaining the common good. We have there in the excerpt from Pope Francis the concept of solidarity, and it's directly linked to the common good. And these two themes, solidarity and the common good, are everywhere present in the literature of the American Solidarity Party. I wonder, Ed, to get us launched this morning, if these words of Pope Francis suggest anything special to you today.
I am probably not the best person in the world to address this in some ways, because my focus a lot is on the practical side of things. And I like to, if I'm going to say something that's going to be kind of a counterpoint or something that might not seem aligned, but I think it is, I hate to start with that, Jim.
No,
but,
I like people who start with that. We want people who are contentious and ready to leap into the fray.
So I think that the two things that I see is that one is that if I see a person drowning, my solidarity with that person does not incline me to jump in the water and drown with them. My solidarity is that could be me. It's not right now, but that could be me drowning. How could I best be helped? How could I get out of that mess? What could someone do to help me? And that's the action that I believe I should take rather than simply jumping in and drowning with them. A lot of things that I see as being proclaimed as solidarity or compassion ends up being really spreading the misery rather than lifting people up. And it's not necessarily said that way. But I'm very, very concerned that what we do is sustainable and that really helps and doesn't simply increase the misery. We're all, at this point, we're all familiar, because I might as well just go ahead and throw the gauntlet down and you'll get all sorts of angry messages maybe. But
no, we won't.
We're all familiar with the famous statement by Bernie Sanders in the last campaign that Venezuela was, the model. That was the place where the American dream really happened. And the idea that people took that it's saying, just go out there, and if you make everybody poor and everybody miserable, then that's the best way to achieve some goal. And I disagree. I think you have to try to raise people up, and that tearing people down is not the way to accomplish that. It doesn't help. I go back to the drowning metaphor. It just doesn't help to jump in the water and drown with somebody. We want to throw on the line. We want to do what we can to improve their lot. So anyway, there's my opening, Jim. Sorry.
Well, we've read oftentimes excerpts from Pope Francis where he tells us that we have to be engaged in everyday politics to affect any change. So he might say, worry on the show. And it's just a rumor that he's going to be on next week. That's just a rumor. If he were on the show, on the panel, I think he would say there's a lot of premises between the statement of ideals and the putting of them into practical action. And I thank you for your reminding us of that. Now, Margaret, what might you have to say at this point? Or do you want to play? And there's only one such card in this whole panel show. Do you want to play?
Okay.
Do you want to play your pass card?
Okay, I think I will.
Whoa!
Oh, no, not the past one. No, I thought you meant the one to participate.
I just wanted to say there's only one pass card.
Oh, no. I'll take the participation.
You're prudent to hang on to it because it'll get
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, as was previously mentioned, very good comments. And I would say that at the core of the situation is a faulty definition of what solidarity means, and especially of what the common good actually means. So everybody has, as you mentioned, the wrong definition. So it needs to somehow, which is maybe a giant task, it needs to be clarified. What does everybody mean by the commonwealth? And how does the Church's definition of the commonwealth coincide or contradict or not match the secular definition of the common good and the commonwealth, etc.? So therefore, once having established these differences, one can see how the application of this definition onto the political and the social arena, causes all sorts of results that may or may not coincide with an authentic lifting of the people to have actually an understanding of what is true compassion and what is true solidarity. So in a way, these terms are being used very, very loosely in the secular world, and you could even say that they have politicized theological terms that have a traditional meaning, and they have applied them to a secular type application. So for example, when you talk about compassion and solidarity, their definition, when I say there, I'm referring to the secular definition. Actually, you would think, even though it has some elements that coincide, contradicts the traditional Catholic definition of this term. And it's not necessary for people to understand Thomas Aquinas or have a PhD in philosophy or theology. But it's good to point out, at least from the traditional perspective, what the actual problem is and how it's developing into a wrongly and misunderstood application. So that's what I would think is at the core of the situation that we're discussing.
We can't act well unless we think well. No revolution without a theory of the revolution. And the revolution is a revolution rooted in Christ and not rooted elsewhere. Well, let's go to Benedict XVI and see if things are more in focus, less in focus, or perhaps more developed. Benedict writes in Caritas in Veritate, Charity and Truth, to love someone is to desire that person's good and to take effective steps to secure it. Besides the good of the individual, there is the good that is linked to living in society, the common good. It is the good of all of us, made up of individuals, families, and intermediate groups. who together constitute society. To desire the common good and strive towards it is a requirement of justice and charity. I know that Ed wants to pick up with, well, I suspect he wants to pick up with that first sentence. To love someone is to desire that person's good and to take effective steps to secure it.
I like the effective steps there, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I think is interesting here is that to pick up, kind of continue a thing that I heard there, is that there's been essentially a tendency, really for thousands of years now, to weaponize teachings of the church for some political end, to take what we believe and distort it in some way that achieves some other goal that really isn't related to the core of the teaching. In popularity, I think that a lot of the time, everything being the same, everybody's the same, but that's really what you read at all. It's about desiring the good of the other person and taking effective steps to help. It doesn't say that their end state has to be exactly the same as mine, that everybody has to live in the same size house, everybody has to have the same number of possessions, all that kind of stuff. There's a story, if I might share it here. Currently, I think that everybody focuses on what's wrong. And I know that it's sometimes kind of a trite thing to say, oh, let's look at what's right. But I want to share a story from World War II that I think I've used in my career in technical management a lot. There's a story of somebody was charged with figuring out how to better protect the airplanes that were going over the bombers so that they would come back safely. And they looked into it and tried to figure out how much armor they should put on and where, and this is a costly thing because when you do it, it makes it heavier and that creates problems. So you don't want to put more on than you have to. You can't just armor everything. And so they were looking at, what was a good place, what were the vital systems to protect. Somebody got the bright idea that when he saw these airplanes coming back, he noticed how shot up they were. And he got the idea that he should not protect them where they were shot. He should only protect them where they were never shot when they came back. So he looked for the spots that had absolutely no wounds whatsoever, and that's where he decided to put the armor, thinking being that something wrong with them in that spot, that must be a place that's important. So it's concentrating on what works and not on what doesn't work. I hope that makes sense. And so I wonder if we can't look around and see where the poor are being effectively helped. Where have we seen gains? And I don't know. I think that's something worth looking at, and I think it's worth looking at the United States. And because I am running for office, I do think about this, and I think that sometimes we sell ourselves short. We've achieved not a level of wealth that we see in the 1% and even in the middle class. There's a lot of people that are living a lot better than they live in other countries, and it's not that this country is superior. I'm just practical. I'm just looking at it and saying, what are we doing right? I don't mean right, but I mean, what are we doing that's effective? And how do we do more of it? And how do we begin to own that and express it in a way that invites others to do it, not imposing it? Because I think that maybe that's something that's missed. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to pass to Margaret and see what she has to say, and then maybe I'll come back. I don't know, she's got that pass card in her hand there, but she's being cagey and playing it. Margaret, what do you say?
Well, I think that he's right in what, we should look at the panoramic view of the good things that are happening in this country on different levels. We are extremely privileged, and we have been doing many good things. So that's a very important point. but also we also need to go into the micro vision of society, and in the political arena we also need to keep in mind the areas where we do need improvement and we do need clarification in order to make everything not in an imposed way, but in a general, how can I say it, with everybody understanding or being able to see in a democratic way, I should say, the differences and the things that do need to be addressed. So that's true. We do have a very positive, we can find many positive things, society-wise, economic-wise, and we also do need to keep those in mind. But we should also not forget the specific areas that need a lot of improvement, and most of these areas usually have to do not with simply voting against a certain law or for it, but understanding the nature or the hidden ideology that may be producing these types of situations that we should also look at. So I would say that.
Now that hidden ideology and trying to figure out what it is, that suggests some political philosophy, wouldn't you say?
I would think so. I think it's definitely political philosophy.
All right. Here are a couple of more thoughts to the mix, and the story that Ed shared reminds me of another story. Ed had mentioned the weaponizing of Christian themes. Is this what the church says it teaches? Well, let's take that language and use it in our own way. I had a student for some years who, to my surprise, left philosophy for theology, and to my surprise, he went to Claremont, and the theology at Claremont in Southern California is, what should I say, anything but traditional, and he did very well in the program. And after having finished his doctoral work, he took a position at a small Catholic college in the, well, I can't say northwest, but the north central. I think it's in the great state of Wyoming. At any rate, when I talked to him, he said that what he noticed about the theologians he read is that they pretty much all had something in common. Despite their various differences, they had something in common. They all wanted to show that God pretty much thought the way they thought. Well, I thought it was funny. At any rate, it's an example of trying to bend the gospel to our vision rather than changing our vision and making it a gospel vision. That said, we could pick up a bit on the theme of pointing to good things and how good things can be a starting point. They certainly can, and I think at least since Vatican II, church teaching has, say in the encyclicals, always looked to the signs of the times and has always tried to point out signs of the times that are positive. And I think that's exactly right. At the same time, there's this what could we call it, abrasive reality of contemporary life. In New York City, Bill Blasio, the mayor, won with 63% of the vote, won re-election. and was able to point to a number of positive changes in New York City. Now, one person who didn't think that Bill Blasio had effected many positive changes is Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York. So we have two people in the same party fighting about what's positive and what's not positive. And this might strike a chord with Ed, although Blasio won the election, I think it's just a week or so ago, and Bernie Sanders swore him in. Even though he won the election, 63% of the vote, only 16% of the people voted. And furthermore, New York City has the highest abortion rate of any city in the United States. So we have what Rhonda Chervin's husband, late husband, Martin, referred to as the, I'm not even sure I can pronounce it, the chiaroscuro of life, the interplay of the light and the dark. Well, was I just gassing, or would either of you like to comment on that?
I can pick that up, Jim. Yeah, chiaroscuro is something that I enjoy. It's that hidden, kind of mysterious, dark form. That means that roughly, if my math is doing this in my head is right, that's about 9% of the people of New York made the decision.
That's not democracy.
No, I was just thinking that. That's not really democracy, but that's kind of, we're moving in many ways away from a republic into something that I would say is democracy. But, so, if you go back, and others here are far more intelligent on this than I am, but... I doubt it. Oh, well, wait until you hear what I have to say.
Oh, okay.
Universal suffrage is one of the things that we have attempted in the United States, and it's one of the things that I think we're getting right. When I say that I think we're getting some things right, I don't mean so much that people have big screen TVs. I mean things like free speech and the protections of the Constitution that are a very rare thing in the world. We really, as Americans, forget that nearly every single place in the world does not have free speech. I was at an economics conference a few years ago, and they had a panel discussion on whether free speech increased prosperity across all people in a society. And, of course, I feel that it does. They made many convincing cases that it does. Others took the opposite position and said, no, free speech doesn't help people. Sorry, I went off on that tangent. Pull me back here, Jim. What was the question?
Well, democracy versus republic. What we have achieved is good, and what maybe not so clear.
I guess the point that was kind of a digression I wanted to make was, it's almost like the people here have decided that universal suffrage is not a good thing. It's almost like the people themselves, ironically, have rejected universal suffrage and said, no, we don't think everyone should have a vote. We want to go back to Rome because Rome is a republic, at the time it was a republic. Not everybody had the right to vote. It was only, really a relatively small number. And it's almost like we've moved back to that it's only a small number that should vote. And it's just ironic that through universal suffrage, people have come to the conclusion, they have demonstrated it by their actions, that they don't really think that everybody voting is necessarily a good thing. I don't know what to make of that, but of the ones that vote, those dominate the country. The ones that decide, and that 9% in New York decided for the other 91%. And no one seems to really be bothered about that. And I think it's because the people that have a voice are in that 9%. They're perfectly fine with it.
Margaret, this is a sneak up. Did Plato, I know you read Plato. Did Plato have anything to say about the devolution of democracy that might connect with the phenomenon of New York City?
Well, I don't know specifically about Plato, but what I can say is that throughout Western political history, we have seen, and I guess I can include Aristotle and then all the way through to the present, a discussion about the best form of regime that would be aligning itself with the nature of man in the best possible way. And the discussion you were just having reminded me of this constant discussion and theorizing about whether the few or the privileged elite should be the ones deciding, or if the democracy corresponds to the general populace, and what exactly a true democratic regime would entail. So these questions are constantly found in the historical record of the democratic development of the state. So specifically in the case of New York, I don't have enough background on the issues there that would have made only 9% of the people vote for whatever they were voting. And I do think that this discussion is not new. It's just a continuation of the historical record of what kind of a regime represents a true democratic society. And there are many, many factors that come into play, and many convictions regarding, democracy versus the common good, etc. So it is very interesting, and it is very intricate.
Yes, and I think you're absolutely right to call our attention to the deep historical overlay. And we're better knowing about that than not. Now, a worry always is that we'll be overwhelmed by our knowledge of the deep historical overlay. What? You say it's always been that way? Well, damn. Well, what's the point of my doing anything?
Yeah.
Now, actually, what Plato had to say very specifically is that characteristically, and of course he's thinking of all the city-states of Greece, that characteristically the democratic form of government led to the emergence of a strongman, a demagogue. You play to the multitude, and you play to the multitude, and the multitude primarily prefer to play than do anything else. And as a result, democracy gravitates into a kind of rule by the few. Now, there's this saying that I like, every analogy limps, and you can't very well take Plato and have him chat with de Blasio, but it makes one wonder. At any rate, that sets the stage for our third comment, and this one comes from someone that I know that Margaret has written about, St. John Paul II. And I know also that Rhonda Chervin, who's so often with us, a mainstay, says that of the recent pontiffs, St. John Paul II is her personal favorite. At any rate, in Evangelium Vitae, think early 1990s, he writes, at another level, the roots of the contradiction between the solemn affirmation of human rights and their tragic denial in practice lies in a notion of freedom which exalts the isolated individual in an absolute way and gives no place to solidarity. Gives no place to solidarity, to openness to others and service of them. It is precisely in this sense that Cain's answer to the Lord's question, "Where is Abel your brother?" can be interpreted. I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, every man is his brother's keeper because God entrusts us to one another. That's John Paul II in the Gospel of Life, Evangelium Vitae. Any thought here, Ed?
Oh, my thoughts always go kind of sideways on almost anything.
Good.
There's such a focus right now. I mean, two things. In the United States, it seems to me that right now, especially among the young, there's so much focus on self, and yet it's compassion, the concerns, the right concerns that the young people have about poverty and about injustice and about all the problems in the world. Sometimes that takes the form of what kind of a person am I and not how may I help. It's focused more on self-image, certainly not always, but it becomes almost a way of beating and just with, am I doing the right thing? Am I being compassionate enough and all that? And, we've heard about virtue signaling. Am I saying things that other people will approve of? Somebody was just telling me about this recently, how important that really is to them, that they have to think, let everybody else know that they're in agreement of the day. There's among groups of friends. And that seems like such a complete diversion away from what the core of this is. To say that we're all in this together is not supposed to be already sufficient turn back to about ourselves.
Yes.
It's not about how in my image am I in solidarity sufficiently to deem myself a good person. The focus gets turned back. It's so hard for us to really look outward and to really look at the good and not want to see the good in ourselves, to observe it and then approve it. And as your student that you were talking about, it's so common. There was an album, great rock and roll albums of all time. You'll bring up Plato, but I will bring up great like Jethro Tull and the Aqualung album. Maybe somebody knows it. And there was the album that was a parody of Scripture and that man created God in his own image. And sadly, that's what a lot of people end up doing, because we're so obsessed with self that we can't see our neighbor. We can only see the image of our neighbor that we have hooked up in our heads or in the media. And then we end up doing what we think is effective toward our goal of feeling good about ourselves by using this bogey we've made up. And the real person, the real people in need of our help, the real people in need of our support, they're lost in all this. We never really reach them. We never really help them because we're only helping their ghost that exists in our own intellect. I'm just riffing here, so bear in mind this may not be fully...
That's good material for an examination of conscience. That's for sure. Margaret?
Your mention of John Paul and his words, and also, the topic that we're discussing. I just wanted to mention, by the way, that he also wrote in response to the wrongful application of these values of compassion, of solidarity. I don't know if you're familiar with liberation theology in South America. Liberation theology was and is a movement where the apparent values of compassion, human dignity, And all those values that are usually understood a certain way are used in order to convince, persuade, and establish a political regime or situation that actually takes away, so it's kind of self-contradictory, it takes away the rights of the person, but it uses arguments that are very similar to what we are discussing in regards to compassion, to not just viewing ourselves, but viewing our neighbor. And this type of liberation theology is actually very strong in Latin America, and it uses everything that we're discussing, but applied in a different way. The end result, to make a long story short, is a type of Marxist situation where the dignity of the person is exalted, and at the same time, their basic human rights are taken away. So I just wanted to mention this because John Paul also wrote something in regards to that specific movement. And, of course, everything he mentioned that you read earlier from Evangelium Vitae, it has to be understood a certain way and interpreted in light of what he was trying to say and what his intention was as he wrote it. But I just wanted to bring it up because I thought it was very interesting that all these traditional understandings can be applied in so many different ways, and sometimes they even are self-contradictory. So in the political arena, and specifically with regards to human rights and what that means, what that entails, basic human rights, as mentioned in the Constitution, seem to align with the Christian perspective regarding man's nature. And at the same time, the values that we are and the rights that we are seeing so much discussion about currently might not always have that underlying attachment, even though in the linguistic discourse of the persuasion and the politicizing, the words are used to convince people that they are also human rights. So I think that there's a lot of clarity that needs to be promoted in all these discussions that we hear in the political arena. And I don't think there is enough clarity, but maybe that's the way it is and we just have to adjust to it. But it's good for us to be aware of all the potential ideological and, traditional understandings that might contradict or might not be what they're promoted to be. Anyway, so that's my take on the situation.
Test all things, hold fast to that which is good.
Right.
On a lighter note, this is all very difficult, what we've been discussing. I'd like to shift our discussion, although it's not going to get lighter, it'll just get different, to on-the-ground political efforts in Southern California. And Margaret, I hadn't really known you were a Southern California person until Sebastian Mahfoud ratted you out. So you're probably going to be enlisted in a number of efforts around here. But this is the truly lighter note. Ed said he always liked to take a sideways approach. Do you remember that, Ed?
No, it's true.
What's that?
It's true, except for the times when I go straight as a cannonball.
Well, at any rate, once upon a time, G.K. Chesterton was stuck in a seat on a trolley. And, even then, people were trying to get seats. And he took up a couple seats. There he was, stuck. And someone said to him, "Why, sir, maybe if you turn sideways." And he said, "Madam, I have no sideways." Ah, don't tell me you didn't get that one.
Oh, we got it. It's very good.
All right, that's the kind of reassurance I needed. All right. With at least one positive response, I want to move forward more directly to the second part of our agenda. We need to discuss what solidarity means for our politics on the ground here in Southern California, but part of what it means is how we can get solidly behind an effective effort to bring about change. And I turn things over to Ed at this point. How goes it in the struggle?
Well, we're making some progress. It's a very hard thing to get people. As I've said before, I think that people have been, frankly, the public has been violated and disappointed so frequently that hope is very hard. It's very, very hard to still have hope. I have to fight it myself. But, I want to go back. I was thinking of liberation theology as well earlier. And I think the thing is that we're still having the problem that we're asking for messiahs, and we already have one. That we get these people that come forward and they use pretty words and they use concepts that we feel are right, like solidarity, and then, as I've said, I'm going to overuse this word today, is weaponize it so that they can achieve their own desire for power or their own desire for a legacy. Remember that from 8 years ago, legacy?
Mm-hmm.
They're using these things to achieve power or to achieve a lasting mark on the world, not necessarily a positive one. And the people are having a hard time picking that out because they don't have the fundamentals of philosophy. I'm not saying a long education in it, but they don't have the fundamentals in it. People can't tell the truth. They're having a hard time telling who's straight up, especially when what they hear either sounds pretty or appeals in some way to what they know is right, but they don't detect what's off key. They don't pick up on the little things that say, no, this person's just using me. Anyway, I'm trying to go very straightforward, and I don't know, the people that actually meet me inevitably seem to say, yes, I understand, I know that you really care.
Ed, where do they meet you? What are the contexts in which you're meeting people?
Well, of course, through the American Solidarity Party, from us coming over and meeting at your house. But also, I go, just in the course of the day, if I go get some food for lunch, I eat a lot of fast food. I don't know. I don't know if I should apologize for that or not.
Ed, how are you going to maintain your strength on the campaign trail?
My doctor and my wife both say they don't know why I'm still alive the way that I eat. But however, the point is that I go out and I meet people, and I just say, by the way, this is going to sound crazy, but I'm running for Congress, and it gives me an excuse to talk to them about things and listen. And I say, and you know what? I think we've just had enough of the two major parties. They're just using us. And it's time for us to just do what we need to do what's right for all the people, because I firmly believe that 70 or 80% of the people out there are just done with all this, but they don't have any kind of a choice. They're just stuck with this awful mess. They're wedded to this two-party system of people that are just driving for power and fame and everything else, and certainly money. And, how do you, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give us an alternative. I've made a career, a technical career, management career, leadership career, out of doing things that everybody said couldn't be done because you couldn't get agreement. People would tell me, oh, you'll never get people to get together on this. It'll never happen. And then I come in and I do it, and it happens because I know how to do this. And I think part of it is because I have this drive. I have a very, very strong passion to make things happen that are worthy. Anyway, having said that, every single time they say, oh, my goodness, this is what we need. Every single time. I have never had someone that I met that was an ordinary person out on the street, sometimes literally out on the street, because I just walk up to people and start opening conversations. I never did this before, but by golly, I'm going to do it now. I have never had a time where they said, no, I think we ought to stick with the Democrats, or no, I think we ought to stick with the Republicans. I've never had a single one tell me that.
Margaret, how can somebody like Ed get through to people? This is your first time on the show, and we hope it's not your last time. How does somebody get through?
Well, he's getting through very well by using the strategies that he is talking about. Of course, it's very difficult on a one-to-one basis, but the principle is there. Basically, people, like he said, are not well informed in all matters, and they are taken up by very nice-sounding discourse, especially when it relates to rights and freedoms and things that sound very good that might not be. So in order to get through to people, I would think it would be just as Ed is saying, and just keeping in mind that people sometimes need further clarification of what things are. And like he says, they're hung up on these two parties. So, just getting around that obstacle in a way using common sense and concepts that are easy to be receptive to, and people will usually act on commonsensical suggestions. So I would think that just having a simple communication that is effective, using topics that are easy to understand and also that people are definitely going to accept. So I think one of the points that he's mentioning is the way you present arguments or the way you present certain issues is a key factor in having people vote for you or agree with you or align themselves with your point of view, even though they might not totally agree with you. So it's not an imposition like was mentioned earlier. It's more of a pedagogical way of communicating with people and just having an effective discourse in a very positive, yet positive doesn't mean diluted, in a very positive and down-to-earth way where you can express the basic tenets of what you stand for.
Thank you. We've got 6 minutes, and I'm going to not throw a bomb, but say something that might really get folks going, listeners going. We've talked about the past and how the past shapes the present and how it bears on our hopes for the future. Get into the present just for a few minutes. We have the Me Too phenomenon right now. Of course, I think it's a long-standing phenomenon. We have questions of gender equality, and Ed said some things about equality. We have more women voting than men. That's of note. And we have, Ed, I didn't share this with you before, in Margaret, someone who has written philosophical dimensions of gender. Margaret, can you go in now 5 minutes from the very nature of gender to the nature of communication for someone like Ed?
You mean to give some thoughts on gender and communication?
And practical politics today, this month.
Well, this is a very difficult topic It's
That's
a very
why we
difficult.
have 5 minutes for it, Margaret. That's why we saved 5 minutes for it. Go.
Right. I don't think I can do justice to it in 5 minutes.
That's
But
why you have to come on next week. Go, get it started.
Right. So what I would say is that that the notion of respect and the values that are agreed to by everybody, even though they might have different meanings for everyone, need to be used as a starting point. The things in common are respect for everybody, the nature of equality in the sense that everybody has human dignity and human rights, and that would be a starting point with regard to gender, and that's a starting point. Once that has been established, then getting into gender fluidity, which is actually the issue that I think is what you're referring to. So it's a two-part issue, and I think the sequence of ways in which one needs to talk about these always need to start on a very positive note regarding the value, the preciousness, the uniqueness of gender, of men and women, and the rights that are innate, and the qualities, as John Paul would say, and the genius, I guess is what he would say, that are innate to each gender, and taking it from there, and then discussing gender fluidity in a way where you have already established a positive paradigm. So that way you're not just going in there and saying, I disagree, I agree, but you kind of establish this very positive and commonsensical, respectful context. And then the discussion that flows from there, even though it might not be effective as much as one would want, at least it will be a respectful and maybe develop better communication attempts. But it's a very difficult topic, so I would just start with that emphasis of being very respectful and having a very positive and a true charitable tone when discussing this sort of topic.
Thank you. That leaves 2 minutes. I would like to say that when we return next week, the question of gender and equality will certainly be on our agenda. Other things will be on our agenda as well. And at some point next week, we could, speaking as a Thomist, check in with a common doctor, St. Thomas, who tells us that in the resurrection, our transformed and resurrected bodies will continue to be male or female. And were that not the case, we couldn't even speak about the resurrection of ourselves. We could not even speak about the resurrection of ourselves. Gender is indeed an intrinsic, inherent quality of the human person, and we have much to say constructively about it. What we won't do is spend the whole of next week on that topic. I don't want to narrow things prematurely, but it's certainly something worth developing. I want to thank Ed. I want to thank Margaret. I want to thank our listeners. I want to thank Sebastian Mahfoud, who makes all of this possible. He's dealing with maybe 20 or 30 radio programs simultaneously. And I would like to close with the briefest of prayers. Your people, Lord, who have lived in a great darkness, have seen a greater light. Let us keep always our eyes on that light in the vision it makes possible. Amen. Come, Lord Jesus.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfoud. Good day.